and welcome to the Culture Cast. I'm Chris Dashew, and I am joined, though I'm sure probably begrudgingly, once again to talk yet another Steven Seagal film. My close friend, Jess, Byard.
It's not as begrudgingly as you might think, but it's not.
I wouldn't hope so. I mean, there's this movie is it's a stark contrast from On Deadly Ground. Let's just put it that way.
We'll get into that.
We're continuing Steven Seagal month with a look at Seagal's 1990 classic, and this time I'm not sure I'm saying that jokingly. I would say of his first four movies, it's pretty fucking good. We're going to be talking about 1990's Marked for Death.
Jamaican gangs known as posses are now dominating the American drug trade.
In Above the Law, he got tough.
Who's that?
John Hatcher, DEA.
In Hard to Kill, he got even.
It's not the time for you to walk out on me. I've had enough. He thinks he's retired.
He still looks functional to me.
Now, the man with the short fuse is marked for death.
I want you to meet my sister, goddess of fire.
Steven Seagal is John Hatcher.
He's dead. And he don't even know it.
A good cop.
Your family has been marked.
In a bad mood.
Said he'd kill us both.
I don't think he's gonna get the chance.
What are you planning to do?
I'm gonna take out the posse.
One thought he was invincible. The other thought he could fly. They were both wrong. Who do you fear? Him or me? I'm gonna deliver you into the light.
Steven Seagal is marked for death.
It's my silent partner.
But this time, he's bringing out the big guns. Steven Seagal, marked for death.
Are you some kind of cop?
Nah, I'm just a concerned citizen.
So the film is directed by Dwight H. Little. It stars, once again, the corndog master himself, Steven Seagal. Also stars Keith David, though he's not given much to do, shocking considering Steven Seagal and the way he treats his co-stars. And it also stars Basil Wallace, who plays fantastically named Screwface. Oh, and also Danny Trejo is here for like 10 minutes. Which,
inconsequential to the rest of the movie, but sure.
But what's funny about it is, the funniest thing about Danny Trejo's involvement in this film is this film came out in 1990. 20 years later, Danny Trejo and Steven Seagal would meet once again in Machete, where Steven Seagal is playing the villain opposite Danny Trejo, which I found to be just mildly amusing.
I did forget he was in that, yeah.
Yeah, he's the main villain in Machete too, and which is, again, given the way Seagal has kind of transitioned into a big clown in his later life, it makes perfect sense given the circumstances. But those kind of weird coincidences aside, Jess, what did you think of watching Marked for Death for the first time?
So, I will say that at least this was at least somewhat entertaining, because my biggest issue with On Deadly Ground, right?
Yeah, that was yep.
Yes, On Deadly Ground.
So memorable.
Right. Was that it was just, I realized that it was about a serious topic, but it did just like completely fall into that wood plank void of charisma, as you said, ultra self-serious personality that comes with Seagal, but at least here, because it's not his movie in the way that On Deadly Ground is, there's at least some room for some flair and some flash and some, I have one of my notes is that at least this movie, it has more exciting action scenes that aren't just explosions. There's actual fighting and car chases, and there's more danger than just Seagal running from structure to structure with it exploding behind him. But I mean, still, even that being said, while this movie is better than On Deadly Ground, it was still kind of a slog to get through.
So this is the second time I'd seen Marked for Death, and I liked it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it a lot. It is really dumb. It's fun. I would agree that there are parts of it that are a slog to get through. Pretty much anything to do with Seagal's family is
right.
It's not his family. It's not his wife and kids. It's his sister and I guess it would be his niece. It kind of slows everything down. I mean, it gives the film some stakes, but I don't think there's any point in the movie where I'm actually worried that something bad is going to happen to his family.
You know, except for the part where his, nephew gets, shot up.
Yeah, but I mean, still, once that happens, it's an action movie.
Right. All of the action is very just contained within car chases and hand-to-hand kind of. Now, obviously...
And guns. Seagal uses guns a lot.
But there is a reason, though, at least they try to justify it anyway by giving it a quote-unquote reason that, his character... At the beginning of this film, shoots through this door about, I don't know, quite a few times and just lights this woman up. And he then goes to a confessional and confesses that he's done that and feels really bad about it.
Mind you, that woman had killed his partner.
True, but he didn't want to be a killer. And so,
Sorry, Father, for I have sinned.
I have become what I despise.
Oh God, it's Seagal at his cringiest sometimes.
Well, and that's the thing. Every time this movie gets going, it's entirely, stopped, full stop by Steven Seagal's presence. Any scene that he's not in, featuring Screwface and then on all the other side characters, great. Keith David's in this, always fun to watch, but like you said, not really given a whole lot to do.
Well, knowing what we know about Seagal and the way he treats his co-stars, that's not surprising. I would disagree, though. I don't think when Seagal's on screen, the film slows down. I actually think he's good. I think he is a good part in this movie. And that's because, again, let's not kid ourselves, Jess. This is just a fucking Dirty Harry ripoff.
Right.
Kind of is. He's doing the Clint Eastwood thing. I mean, you could see Eastwood in this movie just as easily as you could see Seagal in this movie.
Yeah, I could see that, but the thing is that would make the movie at least more entertaining to watch. It would still be a so-so story with a whatever plot, but Clint Eastwood is charming.
Well, but
charismatic.
I actually think Seagal is charming in this movie.
I do not.
It's purely subjective when it comes to charming. I'm not saying he's great in this movie, but I will say versus On Deadly Ground or Fire Down Below, where the film is relying on him to be charismatic to push the plot further, this film doesn't rely on his charisma. You know what I mean? This movie doesn't rely on Deadly Ground relies on Seagal's charisma when it comes to his interactions with Joan Chen's character. In this movie, he's not being called on to do much. He does some one-liners. He kills dudes. He throws guys out of windows and through panes of glass. And that's it. He's not really being asked to do much. If we talk about Seagal, I'm pretty sure the best Seagal is the most understated, doing the least possible Seagal. When he's being asked to be an environmentalist, it completely falls apart, as we've seen in the last two movies. But here, he's not being asked to do much, and I think the less you ask of him, the better.
Right, that's very true. I don't know if that necessarily makes it entertaining to watch, though.
Well, I just find this brand of Seagal to be entertaining, but this
is the most palatable and the easiest to believe. It's the easiest to buy
because he kind of looks like a cop. He kind of looks
he definitely looks like a cop, yeah.
And
just
so
with long hair.
And so it works. Above the Law, Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, and Out for Justice. He's either playing former mafia, former cop, former DEA, or in Out for Justice, current cop, former mobster turned cop. And it's this right here is what I want from Seagal. I want an understated, small-scale action movie. He's not trying to save the world. He's not trying to save, the president. He's just trying to save his community. And that's it. It's a pretty small scale. I mean, they go to Kingston, Jamaica in this film, sure, which feels like a complete waste of time at points. But, I will agree on Deadly Ground and Fire Down Below. Neither one of those movies work, but I also think that those movies don't utilize Seagal very well. I mean, it's like, why were Arnold's comedies such a failure? It's because Arnold is not a comedian. He's an actor who understands comedic timing when it comes to action films, but he's not a comedian. And it's just like if you put Seagal in a comedy, like it's not going to work. And I don't even think that's Seagal's fault. That's not the kind of actor that he is at all.
Well, no, and I mean, just reflective of his self-serious personality. Yeah. But there was I enjoy movies that float around in the realm of voodoo, so I did enjoy seeing that featured predominantly here. Now, whether or not it was portrayed in an accurate or particularly sensitive way, I can't attest to that, but I am always interested.
I think we can. I think we can say unequivocally it is action movie voodoo, which is, I mean, at least there wasn't a voodoo doll.
No, not that we saw. There's a lot of, there's chicken head, which I mean that is, chicken beheading is accurate, but yeah, it's very sensationalized. It's very shocking, for the sake of shock. But I do like that, juxtaposed against Steven Seagal's just placid everything.
I mean, and here's the other thing. It's technically not voodoo. It's Obeah, which is like the West African version of voodoo. It was like the precursor to voodoo, which, I mean, again, like, I don't understand that. Why not just make it voodoo? You're playing into the voodoo tropes as it is. Like, us white Westerners aren't going to know any better.
Right, and I mean, that's probably pretty accurate. I do, every character that's within this gang is seen at some point wearing, the colors, the African colors, which is always, that's a great touch. Thanks, guys.
Well, now you know they're from Africa.
Right.
I do love everything about Basil Wallace's Screwface.
Yeah, he's great.
A perfect villain for Seagal. Because if your main actor, if your main action star is going to be Mr. Understated, you have to have a bombastic villain. And you have to have a villain that can fight Seagal. And that's the thing that we missed out on in the last two movies, is he never really gets to fight Chris Christopherson in Fire Down Below, and obviously doesn't fight Michael Caine at all in On Deadly Ground. So it was nice to see some physicality between the lead and the villain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, like it's more, he feels more invested and more a part of the story than he did in On Deadly Ground for me, because like you said, like him and Michael Caine didn't have a lot of time together as characters, and there was very much a disconnect between a lot of that. And here, at least, there is a sort of Punisher style revenge story happening, even if we don't really, care too much, because that part of the movie's pretty boring when it comes to actually meeting his family.
Yeah, it's just the thing with his family felt unnecessarily tacked on to give the film additional stakes when the stakes are already there. I mean, the community is being ravaged by drugs. Why do you need anything more than that? Like, take everything you devote to his family and give all that screen time to Keith David. And I think you fix this movie completely. Like, honestly, if you leave everything else the same, but take the family stuff out and put Keith David's character in and give him more screen time, or even give Tom Wright's character more screen time, who plays the Jamaican cop, give him some more screen time. Give those characters more screen time, because those characters are interesting. Or even with the woman that he meets, who plays kind of like I guess she's the exposition dump of the movie. But
right.
Give her some more screen time, but the family and the characters played by like Elizabeth Grayson and Betty Ford, like, they're not interesting. They're cardboard cutouts. And it's like, I'm not going to be invested in these characters at all, because you've given me no reason to be invested, one. And two, bringing the action star's family into the mix, I feel like that trope is just so fucking played out.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, it can be done well if you're going to make any of the family at all interesting or real characters, but they don't here. They just exist to be in the background and be a motivator for Seagal's character, which his name is Hatcher, I believe, correct?
John Hatcher.
Yes, which is not as bad as
Forrest Taft.
I was gonna say I already pushed it out of my mind.
My favorite part about this movie is how they've continued to keep up these bizarre names for his characters. They sound like characters from a movie.
Well, I mean,
John
that's kind of always
Hatcher.
like an action trope. They just really go overboard with it.
That's what I'm getting at. Like, there's not even like any like winking and nodding. It's like, no, that's his name.
Right. Yeah. Nope. That's it.
Yeah. But all things considered, though, again, I think it's partially the film and partially comparison. There's a lot more interesting stuff going on in this film than in On Deadly Ground. At least there's action. I mean, On Deadly Ground had no action scenes at all, and the ones that it had, they wrapped up so quickly that it didn't even matter.
Right, and like I said, most of them were just explosions anyway, and not really involving anyone. And I mean, sure, we still have his fighting style of Aikido, which is, not as action-packed, at least when he's doing it.
I mean, it's just not action-packed in general. I mean, again, Aikido is... I find it odd that they wanted to put someone in these films who's an Aikido master. What? Oh, man, like...
I mean, people can look cool doing it. It's just Steven Seagal doesn't look cool doing it. Steven Seagal doesn't look cool at all, and he thinks he does. He thinks he looks really awesome.
I mean, he looks better in this movie than he does in On Deadly Ground. In this movie, he doesn't look like the caricature that we all assume he is, right? Because, I mean, in On Deadly Ground, he's got the Nehru fringe jacket. He looks like what I imagine Steven Seagal looks like. In this movie, he just kind of looks like a dude with a ponytail. I mean,
Yeah, I can see that.
Greasy, maybe. But at least he doesn't look like the caricature of Steven Seagal that we kind of all expect now with, all of his weird, Asian jackets that he wears because he's trying to co-opt that.
Right.
I don't know what else to call it.
Furs. Yeah, no, I mean, he is. It's this weird cultural appropriation.
I mean, that's the least of his problems.
Well, yes,
if everything we've read about Seagal is to be believed, his cultural appropriation of Asian fashion is not the problem.
And so I did read a little bit of the section in Seagology, the book that you so graciously provided for me. And so this is considered like essential Steven Seagal.
The first
film.
four are. I mean, the first four. Again, the first four movies are the movies that, like, if you watch the first four movies, you would think this guy is like getting his career started. He's on his way to making some really good movies, and then he makes Under Siege, which I don't know if you've seen Under Siege, but Under Siege is actually a lot of fun. It's pretty much Die Hard on a boat. Mm-hmm. It's got over-the-top villains. It's got really well-cast secondary, supporting characters, and it's a fun movie. And then everything after Under Siege just kind of shits the bed.
Mm-hmm. Is that when everything starts going straight to DVD, or?
No, so everything starts going straight to DVD after The Glimmer Man. Or after Fire Down Below. Then you have Exit Wounds and Half Past Dead as kind of these kind of exceptions that prove the rule, because those movies came out in theaters, but those are kind of outliers. But after Fire Down Below, you have movies that are straight to DVD, and it's pretty much been that way since.
And is that mostly just because of his difficultness to work with?
I think so. I mean, I think having read about him, having read a lot of the things written about him, it seems that Seagal is a prima donna. And
yes.
Unfortunately, prima donnas don't get far in Hollywood.
Well, some of them do.
They do. Well, here's the thing. Prima donnas don't get far in Hollywood if you're the kind of prima donna that he is.
Right.
Which is, treating your co-stars like garbage, locking yourself in your trailer. It takes a lot. You have to be
not actually being that good at your job.
Yeah, you have to be, if you're going to be a prima donna of that caliber, you have to back it up.
Agreed. Yeah. You can't be act like you're God's gift to everyone and then be really shitty and act really terrible towards everybody.
Yeah. I mean, again, for Seagal as an actor, his range is not there. But again, he's also starring in action movies. His range doesn't have to be. No one's asking for his range to be there. No one's requiring his range to be. But like you said, that's not the problem. You can have no range and still be entertaining if you play to the audience and you play to the character. That's not what's happening in these later Seagal films. In a film like this, I think for the most part, this movie knows the kind of actor Seagal is, and I think it plays to his strengths more or less.
Yeah, I would agree. I just don't find his strengths all that worth an hour and a half of my time.
Would you rather watch this or Fire Down Below or On Deadly Ground?
This.
Okay, so at least there's that.
But I could just not watch any of them again.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, again, like I said, the first 4 or 5, if you include Under Siege, they're similar to this, different shades of this. But this is, when I think of Seagal, these are the movies that I wish he had kept making, and I know movies like this, kind of this style of filmmaking, kind of has a shelf life, because you can't just make this kind of movie over and over again. Guy in the city fights people.
Right.
Gang XYZ of XYZ people.
I mean, you can if a guy in the city that's fighting people is somebody that people really enjoy watching, for whatever reason.
I mean,
whether it's because they are a good actor, or whether it's because they're really good looking, or if it's because they're just, at least entertaining in some capacity.
I hate to break it to you, but people saw this movie, and this movie made a lot of money.
Oh, I'm sure it did.
That's kind of this. I mean, again, if you watch the first 5 Seagal movies out of context of his later work, you would think this guy would be going on to have an actual long career, and then it fucking falls apart.
Yeah.
It's shocking.
Mostly because of his attitude.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he is the reason his career didn't take off. It really is. There's one person to blame, and it's the guy in the mirror.
Yes, I'm sure he will disagree with you.
Well, that's fine. He is not here to dispute said assessment. He was given the opportunity. We reached out to his people. His people turned us down at his request, if I'm to be believed by the person I spoke with. So, if he had an opportunity, I would love to have spoken with him, really. I would love to have a conversation with him and pick his brain about him. If the online interviews that I've watched with him are to be believed, he's fucking nuts. And, again, the self-awareness is the problem. I think the biggest thing I'm disappointed by is we didn't watch Above the Law, which is the Seagal movie that has Pam Grier in it.
There is a part of this. This is almost a blaxploitation movie.
It sure is.
If Steven Seagal was not in this movie, it could very easily be
just Keith David
in that same vein.
The Seagal character.
Yeah, if just Keith David, if he were the lead, this could have been a very interesting, 90s blaxploitation movie, which was not a thing, really. I mean, that we were definitely far away from any kind of exploitation genre by 1990. But yeah, if Keith David had been, I think, the lead in this, and they had, just changing that role to having somebody much more charismatic, I think could have really changed the tone and the overall pacing and feel of the movie. And that would have been great. I would have been much better with that.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I really love when Steven Seagal is smashing people's eyes in with his fingers. I mean, you can't beat that.
This movie does have a fair amount of violence.
It's pretty brutal. Like, the movie is pretty brutal.
Yeah, until you can tell, who's a puppet. He's just throwing people around.
That's the literal final scene of the movie, and it seems like they were like, all right, can we just get this over with?
Can you just throw that? Please, just let it crumble. No, it's fine. I know it looks fake. It's fine.
It is so fake.
Whew.
The conclusion with Screwface 2,
I guess.
Screwface 0.5, because, oh, by the way, there's a huge twist in this movie that they kind of hint at early on. I mean, they hint at it, but they don't really address it until you realize that he has a twin, because they make it seem like there's going to be like a supernatural aspect to it.
Right.
And then it's
like it's actually voodoo.
Yeah.
Nope, just kidding.
Yeah, just kidding. He had a twin the entire time. Because
that we mentioned offhand, like, for a second.
Yeah. He has, what did they say? He has 2 heads and 4 eyes. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I would say the fight scene between him and Screwface at the end of the movie is pretty good.
Yeah, it's fun.
You know, comparatively to what we saw on Deadly Ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
I mean,
them fighting with samurai swords and beating the shit out of each other.
On Deadly Ground, Michael Caine just gets the same fate as Jack Nicholson does in Batman, and then, but not nearly the fun outcome of it.
Yeah, it's I'm gonna drop you from a high height and you're gonna drown. Okay, whatever, fine.
Sure.
That doesn't really. If you've got a character who is as devious and scheming as the characters should be if they're a villain, they need to have a good comeuppance. And I mean, the comeuppance Screwface gets is pretty brutal. Not only does Seagal gouge his fucking eyes out with his thumbs, he fucking breaks his back.
Over his knee.
Yeah, just
picks him up like a scarecrow, which that's probably what it was, and just crunch.
Yeah. It's pretty great. Like, it's pretty brutal. It's pretty over the top. You want to see this villain get his comeuppance, and here he goes, having his back broken and his eyes gouged out. Oh, and then he's thrown down an elevator shaft.
And then lands on a big, like, rusty metal spike in the floor.
Yeah. And as he's falling down the elevator shaft, he's, like, hitting the walls on his way down. It's pretty good. I mean, again, if we're talking about, like, a brutal conclusion to the film, which I appreciate an action film that in the final couple frames, it really decides to just go for it. And I like that, but again, there's a lot of time in this movie where nothing happens. So I mean, just things just kind of slow down.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially just a revenge movie a la The Punisher, where he's out for He leaves the life of violence only to have the life of violence follow him, so he's got to go back after it. Which is, of course, a story that we've seen time and time again. But if you're doing it with Steven Seagal, it's going to feel like a story that we've seen time and time again. Because the character is not going to grab you. It's not going to be somebody that's going to kind of pull you out of the expected beats that you're already looking for.
Well, and again, that goes back to Seagal's range, which is not much. I mean, there's a reason this guy was a stuntman. I mean, there's a reason he was a stuntman. I mean, he's not asked to be in front of the camera. He's asked to help behind it. They're not asking him to open his mouth and give lines. They're asking him to help the actors who can act, to do their jobs and be safe. And in this movie, it's like, they didn't ask him to do much, so I'm okay with it. But when you have him, going on these diatribes, like On Deadly Ground, about saving the native people, it's like, fuck, I don't care. Like, I don't care. You don't seem invested. You seem like you're dropped in from another movie. Why do I care? At least in this movie, the character of John Hatcher feels like a character who lives in this space, who lives in this and belongs in this movie, and his addition makes sense. In something like On Deadly Ground, it's like, oh my god, this character makes no sense. He's a firefighter, oil man guy who puts out fires.
Right, but only on oil rigs.
And all it is actually just pushing a button, and then he talks to native people about the environment. Like, what are you going for? Like, at least in this, it's like he's a cop or a former, DEA agent. He kicks people's asses and he beats the shit out of them. Okay, I'm on board with that, sure. But again, like you said, there ain't much to it.
No, it's an okay ride.
And that's kind of all it... Isn't that kind of all it needs to be?
Yeah, I guess. Like, if this is your type of movie, if you are an action fan, then I guess this is probably something that you might enjoy. And, for me, I guess the equivalent would be the zillionth slasher knockoff that I've seen that's just like a million of them, but for some reason I like, pieces of it, so I stick to it. This is probably something that falls definitely in the, if you are an action fan and you're a completist, check it out. If you don't really care too much about action and you don't already like Steven Seagal, then you could probably pass it and be fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting 90s action film, but like you said, I mean, it doesn't break the mold. It feels very much Dirty Harry-esque. No,
but what was with, like, 1990 and Voodoo? Because, like, in 1989 was Child's Play.
I don't know, and then you have The Serpent and the Rainbow in, like, what, 92 or 3? If that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I have no idea. I couldn't tell you, but there's a lot of voodoo. A lot of it. And a lot of villains. A lot of villains doing voodoo. Not main characters. Voodoo's never portrayed in a positive light. Which is unfortunate, because that seems a little bit like typecasting. Oh, he's got a voodoo character? He's got to be a bad guy. Like, all right, great. Awesome, Hollywood. Really reaching there. Really going outside of the box. Yeah, I would say that this film is definitely better than what we've seen so far, but again, this is very much a time capsule of a run of films that existed at a specific time in Seagal's career, and once that transitioned out of this, once we transition away from this is when it becomes, is when kind of Seagal's career just, I don't know. I mean, you come across, 1998, and that's when Seagal's first film, The Patriot, goes direct to DVD, and that's where he plays a doctor. And yes, that's a real thing.
Not the Mel Gibson Patriot.
No, it's a film of the same name, but this one has Steven Seagal, so equally as uncharismatic and unlikable a human being.
Right.
Also, probably not a very good film, just like the Mel Gibson movie. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that movie good?
No, it's not.
I
am not a fan of anything really that other than Mad Max, and I do like Lethal Weapon.
I would say Mad Max is good in spite of Mel Gibson, though. Right? I mean, that's proven point. Mad Max Fury Road. He's nowhere near it, and that movie's amazing. Amazing, overrated, but amazing.
Yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah, it's good. Diminishing Returns, I've seen it about 3 times, and I don't think I need to watch it again. But I know people who love that movie and, will extol the wisdom of George Miller, and I'm just like, yeah, it's okay. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's just, I'm not a big action person. It's not the genre that I come back to. It's not one that I do a lot of rewatching within. And of, the big names that we've talked about so far in this month of action stars, Seagal is not on the list of ones that has really any worth of rewatch for me.
Well, and again, I mean, if you've seen this now, which you have, and this is not your cup of tea, then you've pretty much kind of seen, aside from watching like a direct-to-DVD Seagal movie, you've kind of seen as much of Seagal as you're going to see, realistically. You've seen kind of his range. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah,
I assumed.
Yeah, and you assumed correctly. So what would you give the film out of 5?
A 2 out of 5.
Well, at least that's better than On Deadly Ground.
Yes, yeah.
As for me, I would give it probably a 3.5. It's fun. It's one of his better movies. And when you've got 41 movies to your name, and 5 of them are considered good to great, depending on who you talk to, this one's right there up there at the top of the pack. So I'm 3.5. I think it's fun. At least his character's name isn't what his character's name is in Out for Justice. Gino Foligno. No irony there.
Gino Foligno.
Detective Gino Foligno. Simply fucking stunning. But on that note, let's talk about the next movie we're going to be watching on the Culture Cast.
A top-secret satellite with nuclear capabilities. A team of international terrorists. A government-held hostage.
The President and the others been safely evacuated.
an undetectable moving headquarters.
I'd like to call your attention to the highly trained men with the automatic weapons they may be called upon to shoot you.
There's only one problem.
Any other hero?
The cook from Under Siege is back.
I'm not even a good cook, but there are some things I'm good at.
And things are really heating up.
There's the 45, okay?
Yeah. Last time, he rocked the boat. This time, the sky's the limit. Steven Seagal. Under Siege 2.
This, I'm trained for.
That's right, I will be joined by none other than Father Malone and one half of the screenwriting duo that brought Under Siege 2 to the big screen. We're talking Under Siege 2. And I'm joined by Father Malone and Richard Haddam. Richard technically is in an interview, but he'll be there to talk about what it was like to actually meet Seagal and how Steven Seagal kind of helped Richard get to the spot that he's in his career now, begrudgingly or not.
Right.
Yeah.
That's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to listening to that one.
Yeah, Richard has some hot takes about Seagal. Shocking. I'm not sure how hot they really are. I don't know how he's an asshole. Shocking. Oh, boy.
Ooh.
Yeah, right. Until then, where can people find you, Jess?
You can find me on Twitter at writer Jess Byard. I pretty much post everything there. If you want to hear Chris and I together, you can hear us on our other podcast, The One Season Show, where we talk about television that lasted only one season. And you can hear us on our other podcast, Scary Stories We Tell, where we delve into true crime, unexplained, paranormal. We've got a bunch of interviews. We've got deep dives, all kind of good stuff over there. Check that out. That's about it.
As for me, you can find me here. You can find me on Twitter, casualty_Chris. All those projects that Jess already talked about, I'm there. Bunch of stuff on Twitter. Just follow me on Twitter. That's it. That's all you need to do. Culturecast.com, patreon.com/culturecast. That's where you can donate. That's where you can find more episodes, because there are a lot of them, and I can say all but 3 of them have nothing to do with Steven Seagal. So 4 now, technically, because we did Under Siege at some point. I don't remember when, but long ago we did Under Siege on a podcast. But that's where you can find me. Big thanks to you, Jess, for joining me once again. I'm sure a little less begrudgingly than last time.
This may very well be my very last Seagal movie.
Until you realize that Steven Seagal has done a horror movie where he fights vampires. Aha! See? See? There's not a no immediately, which means you're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the name of that movie, ladies and gentlemen? Against the Dark, where he plays a character named Tao.